All right. So welcome. My name's Marian Kelly. I am an assistant chief of the fire department. I appreciate your coming today. And we're going to talk about fire mitigation, basically. So I often start by talking about the fire department because I've noticed, a lot of people don't really know that much about us or what we do. We are all local volunteers. We're all property owners up here. And we've got people who do firefighting, people who do what we call special duty responders. That's logistics and traffic control and so forth. It's the people who want to help us out, but who don't feel like they have the either the interest or the physicality to pull a hose or the more strenuous stuff. And we really need them. They lead ambulances and other people responding from outside our area to the scene. Because as you might have noticed, it's really easy to get lost around here. So they free up firefighters to be doing the heavy physical stuff while they're taking care of the other stuff that needs to be done. Generally speaking, we average about a dozen of each of those kind of members on our department. So our department usually total membership 25 to 30. We also have 2 EMTs and about 4 EMRs, which is 1 level below EMT. We're always looking for volunteers, and there's definitely no experience necessary. You guys, if you join us, you're bringing your enthusiasm and your time, and we're providing the equipment and the training. None of us, or maybe only 1 or 2 of us, ever started with any fire experience before we got here. It's all things we've learned from the department. We cover basically the area that's Crystal Lakes, plus a little bit on the outlying edges. That means 5,000 acres, 86 miles of road, and that's 1,600 lots inside Crystal. We're about half built out, and we also respond outside our district. First of all, to directly outside our district. If something starts in the national forest immediately surrounding us, we're going to be the first ones there. Until somebody else arrives to either take it over or say good job and walk away, which occasionally happens. So we also have mutual aid agreements with pretty much every fire department up and down the mountain. We all work really well together, and they come to help us out if we need help, and we go help them out if they need help. They don't hesitate to ask. Red Feather is our primary mutual aid department. We work together 99% of the time, and so we also train together. To make sure that we are working together effectively. So, what are the sources for the information I'm going to give you? Because like I said, I didn't have any fire experience before I got here, and they don't let me go out and set fire to things to see what happens. So I have to pick this up from somewhere. The somewhere is National Fire Protection Agents Association, the U.S. Forest Service, specifically their Fire Sciences Lab in Missoula, Montana. And FireWise and Fire Adapted Communities are both groups that use this information in their recommendations. Those are both also things you can look up either of those and find more information online, more along the lines of the stuff I'm giving you. So they offer a lot of advice on fire protection and so forth. And all of it's coming from this same basic source of research and information. So, why are you here? Well, 5 years ago, average number of homes lost to wildfire nationwide was about 3,000. In 2020, which is the last year that we have full data for, the number was more than 10,000. Cameron Peak Fire burned over 200,000 acres and destroyed 224 homes. The East Troublesome Fire, which joined up with the Cameron Peak Fire, burned 193,000 acres and 366 homes. And as we saw last year, the Marshall Fire burned 1,000 homes. Well, 1,000 structures is what I have. I don't know for sure that they're all homes. So obviously we have a problem, and obviously that problem is getting worse. So really what you're here, I hope, is to find out what you can do. And I really hope that it's to find out what you can do, because the problem is we have a math problem. The math problem is there's no fire agency with the resources to protect all these homes in a wildfire. We can fight a fire in one house, but when there are dozens of homes burning and the forest is burning, we do not have enough people. Especially, Crystal doesn't have enough people. Like I said, I got about a dozen firefighters. We can call in all the resources we need, but we still will never have enough people. My example, because it's the one I have more information from, is from the High Park fire. I haven't been able to find full information out of things like Cameron Peak. So as an example, there were thousands of firefighters doing structure protection and some mitigation works. They were working for weeks to prevent the High Park fire from getting into Glacier View Meadows. That was one of their things. Keep it from crossing Highway 14, keep it from getting into Glacier View Meadows. And there were 120 engines working structure protection when the fire jumped the containment lines. It jumped 14. And despite having all of these firefighters in there, they still lost 57 homes. And we saw similar things with Cameron Peak, certainly with Marshall. Especially with Cameron Peak and Marshall, what we were looking at were wind-driven fires. That changes the calculations a lot. It does affect some of what I'm going to tell you. What I am telling you is what happens in a fire under normal circumstances. These wind-driven fires, all bets are off. They do not act exactly the same. They are also not guaranteed to be the fire that we're going to deal with, which is why it's still vital and useful to learn this. So the reason I'm glad you're here is because you guys are the solution to our math problem. Because the best time to fight that wildfire is before it happens. Figure out where I'm at. We can't stop the big flames. We can't keep that fire from starting most of the time, and we can't keep it from coming towards us most of the time. So what we have to do is we have to protect the structures in advance, and that means having the property owners do that. So what is fire? Not science-based. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Fire is one of the easiest natural disasters to mitigate. It's obviously not something we can guaranteed take care of. If we could, we wouldn't have lost anything. Any houses in Marshall, any houses from the Cameron Peak. But fire has to spread from combustion point to combustion point. It can't go someplace there isn't something for it to burn. And that's why we can mitigate it. Because if the requirements of combustion aren't met, then that fire is going to at least be less intense, if not stop altogether, or not go that direction. So that's what mitigation is all about. It's about reducing or removing those combustion points, taking out that next ignition point. So structures ignite in three ways. The fire walks, or burns rather, directly up to the structure. That's direct flame contact. There's a continuous path of fuels, and the fire is able to burn just right up to the house and burn it. They also ignite through radiant heat. Something near the house is burning so hot that the house catches on fire. The third way they ignite is flying embers and brands. You get firebrands that are produced by high-intensity fires. They can be big pieces. They can be big as your palm, and they can fly miles ahead of a fire. And they gather in places near or on the house, and then you have the same situation you had at the beginning with your direct flame contact, because you have a fire burning right up next to the house. So mitigation has to take into account these three ways that the house can catch on fire. If our objective is to stop the homes from burning, we have to start at the house and work outward. As I said, we cannot stop those big flames. But we can start at the structure and do fire protection before the fire starts. And if we're lucky and under good conditions, we can keep that structure from burning because of what we do in advance. How? I'm telling you all this stuff. Now you need to know how to actually do it. Well, we're going to start with effectively why people started looking into this. They all thought, I think everybody thought we knew how fires worked. There's this big wall of flames and it goes through and it destroys everything in its path. And unfortunately, lately, we've seen a few that do that. Marshall Fire basically did that. But by and large, fires don't burn everything in their path. This is a picture from Black Forest Fire. And I'm not sure exactly how clear it is, but we've got, we have a house here, and we have a lot of things here that used to be houses. These are the foundations. So, I gotta get this turned back off, sorry. The news media likes to call that kind of thing a miracle. It's a miracle house, it survived. But if that's a miracle house, are these miracle trees? We have a lot of miracle trees. So why did that house survive and the one right next door burn? That's what they started looking at. Why is this happening? The why boils down to one of these houses was more vulnerable than the other. And that's where mitigation comes in. So now I'm going to talk about how fire works scientifically. Anyway, so for a fire, you have a fire triangle. There are 3 things you have to have a fire. And we all know what they are. You have to have something that's burning, or something that can burn, rather. You have to have a heat source to start it on fire, and you have to have oxygen so it'll burn. Remove any one of those 3 things, and that fire goes out. There's also a science of wildfire. And that is also a triangle because we like triangles. The science of wildfire has to do with what will the fire do in a wildland situation. What's it going to do? Where's it going to go? How intense is it going to be? And that triangle is made up of what is it burning, where is it burning, and what is the weather doing to it. We're going to talk about each of those a little bit more. And the reason I'm going over the science part of it is because it's a lot easier to understand what I say to do based on what you know is going on. Also, it makes it easier for you to decide when you're looking at a situation, do I need to do A or B? Well, I know why it's going to burn, or I know why this is going to come this way, and therefore I know what to do. So, fuel types. For wildfires, wildland firefighters have dozens of fuel types they talk about. We're only interested in the extremes, the extreme ends. We have light, flashy fuels. These are things like grasses and small brush and pine needles. They're just very small things in large quantities, generally speaking. We also, on the other end, have heavy fuels. Heavy fuels are your trees and, unfortunately, your houses. From the point of view of a fire, your house is just a fuel. Got behind. So the reason that we care about these 2 extremes, or the reason to talk about these extremes, are because of how they burn. They burn differently. Your light, flashy fuels catch fire quickly, they burn quickly, and they burn out quickly. They have a large surface area and a small volume inside that surface area, and that means that there's more ability for it to just flash fire. It'll catch fire very easily. But because they're so small, there's not much going on there, and it burns out quickly. They don't burn all that hot either. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous. More people are actually harmed by grass fires than wildland fires. Part of that is how fast they move, and part of it is not perhaps taking it as seriously as they might. Because it's just grass that's burning, right? So a grass fire, catch fire quick, doesn't burn all that hot, moves fast, burns out quick. On the other side, we have your heavy fuels. They're exactly the opposite. They take a lot longer to catch fire, they're going to burn a lot hotter, and they're going to burn a lot longer. So, where am I? The thing is, as I said, a house is a heavy fuel. That should mean it's going to take it a long time to catch fire. And what we found is that isn't always the case. Houses often catch fire quicker than they ought to. Well, the reason for that is because we make them vulnerable. We put or allow to gather ladder fuels around them. Ladder fuels are essentially, it's creating that continuity of fuel that allows the fire to move from ignition point to ignition point. It's continuity across the ground, and it's continuity up. So for the ladder fuel, It allows the fire to go from burning along the ground, where it's burning in those light fuels, usually pine needles and duff, and it can start burning into bushes, and then from bushes into lower tree branches, and then into the trees. The bark of the tree doesn't catch fire easily. It's the needles, it's the leaves, and so you have a low intensity fire until it starts to climb. Once it climbs, it's up in the treetops, it's got a lot to burn, it's going to take the tree down, and it's going to be able to, it's right up there where the wind's blowing, generally speaking, and it's going to be able to hop from treetop to treetop. So your surface fuel fire is a low intensity fire. When it gets up into the treetops, you have a high intensity fire. And it's the ladder fuels that allow it to go from one to the other. And we put what are essentially ladder fuels around our houses as well. The second thing that's going to affect what the wildfire is going to do, where it's going to go, is your topography. There's a lot to say there. The main thing you need to know is that fire runs fast uphill. A fire will double in size for every 10 degrees of slope. Not size, speed, sorry. The speed doubles for every 10% increase in your slope. So the steeper it gets, the faster it moves. And that's because it's preheating everything in front of it. So you've got your convection is preheating everything, your radiant heat is catching the next thing on fire, and it's moving direct flame contact along the ground. This means that it affects how big your mitigation area should be. It needs to be larger on the downhill side from your house. And it affects things like how much you need to maybe pay attention if your house happens to be in a chimney or a saddle, an area where you've got two slopes coming together, because that channels both the heat and the wind, and you get fire moving very fast up it. So if you happen to be sitting between two ridges, you need to pay more attention to your fire mitigation efforts. The final thing that affects a fire is the weather, of course. And weather is the main thing that affects what a fire does. It is going to decide where it's going with the wind. And it can do some very strange things with the wind. And it's the only thing that's likely to be able to put the fire out. We can often contain it. It doesn't go out until we get enough moisture to put it out. Because a wildfire is just, it's too much, it's too big, and it's not something that we can actually extinguish. We need the weather for that. And of course, we never get any wind up here, so we don't need to worry about that, right? No. As an example, as far as what the wind can do, and again, we saw this with Marshall, but a specific example from Cameron Peak fire. In 3 days, between September 4th and September 7th, it grew 78,000 acres because it was being pushed by a 70-mile-an-hour wind. What stopped that run? 8 to 14 inches of snow on the 8th. So that's the weather. And that, of course, is not anything we can do anything about. We have to work around it. As a point with Cameron Peak, that 8 to 14 inches didn't put the fire out. It stopped that massive spread. Even a lot of snow, when you're talking about a wildfire burning in heavy timber, it's not going to put it out. We need an extended period of more moisture to do that. So we've got two triangles that tell us what a fire is, what it takes for the fire to exist and where it's going to go. And they have one thing in common, just the fuel. And that's a good thing because that's the only one of any of these that we can do anything about. And that's why mitigation is so important. So, as I mentioned firebrands before. We've got flame fronts as well. We've got these two things that we pay attention to when it comes to fire. These two things that are most likely to impact our houses. So the flame front, we can all picture it. We've seen it on the news. It's a big wall of fire coming at you. It's a lot of fire. It's very hot. It's very intense. It's really dramatic. And it's something that they have done some studies on. Back in 1997, the US and Canada and Russia got together and did the Crown Fire modeling experiments. This was in the Northwest Territories. They did it for 6 years, and they made these 5 square mile blocks of land in, like I said, in the Northwest Territories in Canada. I have no idea how we convinced Canada to set fire to itself, but the idea was what happens when we burn these blocks. And they built these little houses. Let's see a little hut in the lower left corner. Those are just kind of the front of a house, basically, a little hut. And what they're trying to do is find out, we know our math, we know our science and our math and what we think is going to happen. What's actually going to happen when we do it. The first of these little houses, which you're looking at right now, is 30 feet from the edge of the forest there. So it's 30 feet from the flame front. And as you can see, when that radiant heat and that flame front hits it, it catches fire. It pretty much burst into flames there. That's the radiant heat, and that's radiant heat at 30 feet from that large of a fire. What I don't have here, because I can't find it online, because apparently everybody likes this because it's really dramatic and doesn't like what happens after this. Except I think that's even more dramatic. What happens after this is that goes out. As soon as the flame front passes, those flames drop. That little hut there stops burning. Now, it's still got some areas that are smoldering. If it's left alone and nobody comes in and puts it out, it's still going to burn down. But it's not going to maintain that flames. As soon as that heat source is gone, so are the flames. The other thing we don't see, because they didn't focus on it, was they also put these little huts at 60 feet out and 90 feet out. Neither of those caught fire at all. So that much heat only caught the one that was 30 feet out on fire, and that fire went out as soon as the heat went away. So on the other side, like I said, we've got firebrands. These are low-intensity fire in themselves. It's like the embers from your fire, from your campfire. So they're low intensity, but they come out of high-intensity fire. So fire like the one that we just saw in the flame front experiment is throwing up firebrands. And they can fly miles ahead of the fire. And what firebrands do is they gather. And they gather around the house, and they can set fire to it. Now, see, this is the Insurance Institute Safety Organization, and they decided to build a house and put it in a experimental area where they're blowing firebrands at it. Now, they're blowing firebrands at 10 to 20 miles an hour, which is typical winds around a wildfire. Obviously not the same as one of those flame-driven fires. They also use different building materials, and they put mulch in around the base of it, and they put mulch in the gutters. This is nearly real time. It's maybe sped up a little. It's got a few cuts in it. But you can see how fast that house catches fire with the firebrands. But where it started was in the mulch. They did use more than one building material, and later on, after we've talked about building materials and houses and so forth, we'll look at this again, and I'll tell you which is what and where. But so this is an experiment showing what happens with the firebrands. And this, like I said, this is with 10 to 20 mile an hour winds. Big difference from like the 70 mile an hour type, which aren't going to by themselves. What 70 mile an hour winds will do is make sure there's more firebrands there and that they've got plenty of oxygen to burn once they catch someplace. So the trick is between flames and firebrand is we're not paying attention to the right thing. And that is because we are fooled by our experience, and we're going to have one of the guys from Missoula, Montana Fire Sciences Lab talk to us about that.
When I show this picture to people, they're absolutely amazed that this can occur. First of all, we have the sense that wildfire, high-intensity wildfire, like depicted in this particular picture, absolutely engulfs and explodes houses into flames. And so when I show this, and by the way, let me just say that this high-intensity fire at its closest point is about 45 feet from this house. And let me also say that the photographer in this picture was feeling a considerable exposure to the flame. They were beginning to feel the pain that is accompanied by the exposure that produces injury. But that says nothing about what's going on with this house. So let's take a look and see what the house looks like after the fire. So the crown fire has spread through and the house is still here. And the house is still there, not because fire suppression, fire protection actions were taken to keep that house from burning down. This house actually did not ignite from that fire. So where's the disconnect in all of this? Well, the disconnect is between what we feel as a person and what it takes to ignite this structure from flames. What we feel is pain and injury from exposures to heat that is considerably less than what it takes to actually even char wood. Let me give you an example. The exposure that will produce a second-degree burn on my exposed skin in 5 seconds takes over 27 minutes to ignite the wood. What that means is that I can get very burned from a fire, and the house isn't even beginning to char. So what does that mean in terms of our perspective? Well, what that means is that we start paying attention to these big flames, which then produces our perception that, my goodness, how in the world can this house still be here with all that flame in the picture? And the reason is because the requirements for combustion that are produced by a flame like that are so much higher than what it takes to cause us injury, that our perspective is personal. Our perspective is from our pain and injury, not from the requirements for combustion. So as it turns out, we are many, many times, more than 100 times more sensitive to pain and injury than what it takes to actually ignite this house. And that means we start paying a lot of attention to flames like this and not to things like firebrands. Firebrands are extremely effective in igniting the structure from their accumulation and then slowly producing glowing combustion on the house that then produces flaming combustion if it sustains and eventually destroys the house, is out of our perspective. Our perspective is on what affects us. The big flames, the big heat that we feel that produces the pain that impresses us is not necessarily related to what it takes to ignite the structure.
Some of that went by just a little quick, so 2 bits to pull out. Specifically, 5 seconds to burn me, 27 minutes to start a house on fire. So what that means, for example, is here, they're all running for the big flames down the hill. What's going to burn that house down, or rather what's the more immediate threat? This broom or whatever it is that's burning up against the house. And what about this lady here? She's not having a good time, but she's wearing shorts and a t-shirt. The firebrands aren't causing her that much of a problem. She might end up with some little spot burns, and she really shouldn't be there, but we're looking at the wrong thing. So when we mitigate, we have to look for both of those things. We have to guard against both of those problems. And a lot of mitigation advice in the past was looking at the flame front. It was looking at the radiant heat exposure and telling you to take down trees. Well, you do need to take down some trees, but that's not the only thing you need to do, and that's not necessarily the most effective thing to do. So what we want to do is we need to mitigate to reduce the potential for that high-intensity fire to burn right up close to your structure. You want to keep that high-intensity fire 30 feet or more out. And we also want to reduce the structure's ignitability from things like firebrands. Structures aren't inherently easily ignitable. We create those vulnerabilities, and we can remove those vulnerabilities. So how much good is this stuff? Which I will tell you the specifics in a little bit. Well, historically, the survival rate of structures with non-flammable roofs that are at least 30 feet from heavy fuels has been 85 to 90%. In Waldo Canyon fire, they've been doing a lot of work in that area on mitigation. And in that case, Structures that were impacted by it that survived without any damage, 81%. Neither of those is 100%, but they're pretty good odds. Now, again, we've seen some fires lately that work differently, that do a lot more damage than that. Cameron Peak Fire, the results were a lot more all or nothing. There were 454 structures impacted by the fire. 8 were damaged, all the rest were destroyed. That's what happens when you have a high wind pushing a fire, unfortunately. And in Marshall, we had a combination of the wind, and because of how you build in a city, how many of those houses do you think were actually more than 30 feet from their neighbors? There was a lot of heat going on there, and that was part of what made that into a wave of fire that destroyed pretty much everything. So it's just to bear in mind, this stuff will help, but we cannot promise it will always help. So what we're talking about the home ignition zone, the part of the name of the class here, it's that area that is from 30 to 100 feet outside your home. It's that first 100 feet. The first 30 is the most important, and then the 100 feet are also, it's the next most important. So this is the area we're going to talk about doing stuff in. And just like I want you guys to do when you go out there, start at the house, work out. You need to begin with the bit that you want to protect and work your way out from there. So your goals at your house: keep radiant heat, or keep fire away from the structure. Make sure that radiant heat can't impact it for long enough to cause a problem. So you won't have something burning hot for 27 minutes right outside the house. And make sure that you don't have direct flame contact. Don't leave that path of fuel that goes all the way up to your door and lets the fire just knock on and come on in. And you don't want to give embers anywhere to catch. That's your firebrand side. Do everything you can to keep those embers from having a place they can gather and things they can burn that are right there up against the house. So starting at the top, we'll work our way down. From your chimney to your eaves, first thing, your roof. Non-combustible roof. As we said, that is one of the main things. That statistic I gave you for historically, 85 to 90% survive. Non-combustible roof. Pretty much up here in Crystal, unless you have a very old house up here, you will have a non-combustible roof. Crystal won't let you build one without non-combustion, which puts us ahead of some places where they're more focused on the look of the community and require things like shake shingles, which are about the worst thing you can have for fire safety. Now, with your non-combustible roof, it has to be properly installed and maintained. If you're not sure if your roof was properly installed, get someone out to take a look at it. The other thing you can do to some extent is take a look at it yourself. You're looking for gaps between parts of the roof, between the roof and the chimney roof and the skylight boxes. What you want to do is make sure that you don't have places where you've got pine needles gathering up around these features on your house. Because where pine needles gather, you've got fuel. You also have a place where embers can gather. If you have an acrylic skylight and you can replace it. The acrylic is going to melt. A lot of skylights generally have 2 layers. Sometimes one of them is glass and the other one's acrylic. If you can, figure out which one it is. Because if the top one is glass, you're fine. If the top one is acrylic, you can have embers land on the skylight top and burn through, and then they're inside the skylight box sitting on the glass, and they can burn from in there. So, do we think this might be a problem? The interesting thing is not as much as you might think. When they were doing that crown fire modeling experiment, they also built themselves a little cabin and put a roof on it and put pine needles 1 inch thick on it. And then they set fire to it. And the pine needles burned off and the roof was fine. Because again, they're light flashy fuels, they burn fast. And the roof is non-flammable. So they're not going to sit on there producing a huge amount of heat. So pine needles sitting on your roof, if it's non-flammable roof and it's well installed and so forth, aren't going to be a big issue. The problem and the place we get the issue is where the pitch changes. You've got that dormer window or whatever it is there. And you've got pine needles up against that. Well, now we have a place where two things connect. And if one of those things is a bit more like this, like an actual dormer window, now you've got fire right up against something that is flammable. So that's why you need to watch out for things like your chimney box, your chimney, and your skylight boxes, because you've got your non-flammable roof and you've got your flammable. So don't worry about pine needles on the roof. Pine needles in the gutter are another thing. So, gutters and vents. Keep your gutters clean. Like I said, pine needles in the gutter are a problem. They make a great fuel source. Metal gutters are preferred because vinyl will melt and deform. And then whatever is in it, that is burning in it, will drop to the base of the house. So if you have vinyl gutters and you can replace them, that is a good idea. Enclose basically any opening in the house, your eaves and your vents. And what you want is wire screens 1/8 inch or smaller. By the way, one of the handouts over there is it's a table. It shows all of the things that I'm talking about here as a check off. I've got this and I need to do that. It's also on our website. It's called it's a mitigation assessment checklist. Okay. So with the wire screens, you're looking for 1/8 inch or smaller mesh, and that's small enough to keep the firebrands out. And you want to cover these because the last thing you want is firebrands inside the walls of your house. So that is all vents, soffit vents, ridge vents, dryer vents, all your vents. Sometimes with dryer vents and some of the other vents, it's hard to tell if there's something inside of it. Some of them do have some mesh inside, but because they want to keep animals out, for example. It's not always going to be something that's wire. And you do want wire because, again, vinyl's going to melt. It's not the easiest thing in the world to find actual 1/8 inch wire mesh, but you can usually find it online. Many of the hardware stores do have it. You just might have to order it. It seems to be called hardware cloth a lot. Just to help you find it. So, like I said, gutters, that is a problem. All that leaves looks like on the roof would not be an issue. But because they're in the gutter, it can burn up under the edge of the roof. And that's why we need to be cleaning them out. Because up under the edge of the roof is not a non-flammable surface. Moving on down from your eaves to your foundation, your walls, which you probably can't change if you already built your place, but it tells you what to be thinking of. If your part of something that's on your house is more vulnerable, then you mitigate better around it. So obviously things like fiber cement and masonry are going to be really, really good because they're not going to catch fire in the first place. Whole log is good because it takes a long time to catch fire. Again, it's a heavy fuel. Vinyl siding is not so great. The plus on vinyl siding is it's not going to ignite except by direct flame contact, or at least it's very unlikely to ignite that way. The minus is it deforms under even low heat and then it falls off the walls. And if you don't have solid walls behind the vinyl, you're going to have a problem because now you've got openings basically into the walls for firebrands to get into. If it's siding that's not vinyl, as long as it's well maintained, it should be reasonably resistant. It's not going to be as resistant as the bigger materials like whole log and so forth. And windows. We have windows in our walls. So with windows, single pane windows are the worst ones you can have. And the reason is that the reason a window breaks in a fire is because the part of the window that you can see is getting heated much more than the part of the window under the frame. When the temperature between those two, when that differential becomes high enough, then the window's going to break. So with single pane windows, they're the most likely to break because they they don't have anything else to protect them. It's just that one pane. When it breaks, it's going to, when it breaks, it's going to fall out of the window frame. The reason I say smaller is better is because if what you happen to have in your house is some areas where you have small single pane windows, those are more likely to break and stay in the frame. The bigger the window, the more likely it is to break and fall out of the frame. Once it's fallen out of the frame, you have an opening into your house for the firebrands to fly through. Multi-pane lasts twice as long as single pane, and that's because your outer pane protects your inner pane. So you're going to end up with some broken window panes, but it's not going to break all the way through, most likely. And again, it's less likely to fall out, or if one pane falls out, you have other panes still there, still protecting the house from having firebrands get inside. Tempered glass is absolutely the best you can do because it's not going to break except under an application of extreme heat. It's also really, really expensive. So it's almost certainly not something anybody's going to just switch over to for all the windows in their house. And they last about twice as long as the multi-pane windows. You've got, it's twice and twice and twice. But it might be a consideration for example, if you have a big, beautiful tree right outside a picture window and you absolutely adore the tree, you certainly don't want to get rid of it. Maybe you put a tempered window pane in that window because it will help protect. It's not going to it's not going to break as easily, and therefore you've got a better situation. It's a form of mitigation. One thing to know about tempered, unfortunately, is that if they do break, they turn into a whole bunch of little small nuggets and definitely fall out of the window frame. But it takes a lot to break them. So for all types of windows, you can help protect by putting wire screens on. Because that way, if the window breaks, the screen still keeps the embers from going in. Wire screens aren't the easiest thing to find these days because everybody goes with fiberglass, and fiberglass is going to melt. So this again fits in the category of the kind of mitigation you might want to consider if you've got a something that's vulnerable, a window that's vulnerable that you can't change it out and you want to protect it from something near it. You might go to the effort of trying to get a wire screen for that. All right, so garages. If it's attached to your house, if it's part of your house, it is a vulnerable point. And the reason it's a vulnerable point is because we don't tend to seal garages as well as we do houses because we don't tend to heat them very much. So what you need to do is things like make sure your door closes completely, it's sealed or weather stripped all the way around so that embers can't easily get in. If you happen to notice that there's this little thing of little pile of pine needles keeps accumulating in some point in your garage because it's not completely sealed, don't put your spare gasoline can where the pine needles tend to gather because that's probably where the embers will get to. So it's just something to consider. And probably don't put your flammable materials right up near the door. But sealing it better is a really good idea. Decks. I think probably all of us have decks around here. We love decks. We came up here to enjoy our surroundings, right? If it's attached to the house, it's part of the house. What does that mean? That means treat your deck as if it's part of your house when you're looking at mitigation. If I tell you to put a 5-foot fuel-free zone around your house, that means around your deck. So you want to mitigate around the deck the same way you do the house. Just consider it part of the footprint of the house. If you can, box or screen in the underside of the deck. This obviously you're not going to do with decks that are at your first floor level, that kind of thing. But if you've got something that's sitting right at ground level and you can get it boxed in completely so nothing can get under it, then it's better and more protective. It prevents fuels from gathering under your deck. It prevents embers from gathering under your deck. And also, if it's a little short deck with a slope below it, it'll stop upslope heat. Because if there's a fire burning down there and it is heating, the heat's obviously coming up that slope and it's gathering under your deck, then you can hit a point where you've got so much radiant heat exposure it can catch fire. So places you can box or screen in. It's it makes it easier to keep it clear and to mitigate it. Do not box or screen it in if you've got gaps between the boards in your deck that allow pine needles to go down through, because then you've still got a collection point, but now you can't get to it to clean it out. So yeah, clean on, under, and around the deck and keep it clear. By on, I mean, sweep pine needles off, get it out of the corners where it collects, things like that. Do not store firewood under your deck. It's tempting, but do not. Do not store construction materials or any other flammable objects under your deck, because something like this is a little bit of a problem. All of that's much more likely to catch fire than the deck itself, but once it's on fire, the deck is on fire. And once the deck is on fire, the house is on fire. And in this case, I think that's the neighboring house too. I'm not positive if that's all part of the same house or not. So, what about deck materials? The good news is all solid decking material, you have to have a lot of heat to start it. Pretty much all solid materials are going to take a significant amount of heat before they're going to catch fire. And it doesn't matter what type of wood you use to make your deck. They haven't been able to show in any experiments that if you use redwood instead of pine that it's better as far as fire safety is concerned. If it's solid, if it's well maintained, it's going to resist for a pretty good amount of time. The well maintained is an important bit. Make sure to look under your deck. Make sure that you don't have some rotting or decaying wood under there, or things that are just not as good as they could be. Because this needs to be solid material, which means something that's not falling apart because it's been there for 30 years now. Natural versus composite. Well, the composite is a lot nicer for managing to maintain it. And as I said, well maintained is important. And the plus, again, all solid decking materials, including composites, take a pretty significant amount of heat to catch fire. The negative with composites is that most of them are not solid. They have interior holes like this, which is probably not as bad as the sort that have the cutouts from the bottom. And most of them have cutouts because they're pretty heavy. So it's just something to be aware of. Am I saying don't build with composite materials? No. Like I said, it's great for maintenance. It's very helpful for a lot of things. It just means that you would work harder to make sure that you don't have fuels under your deck. You're going to mitigate. If it does catch fire, the composites unfortunately will melt and start dripping burning material on what's beneath them, which isn't a problem if you don't have fuels underneath them. So just something to keep in mind. So what are we doing around the house other than doing things, if you can, like changing out vinyl gutters and the like? We're cleaning it up. We're keeping it clear of things like pine needles in the gutters. So we're going to clean the gutters, sweep needle and leaf litter off our walkways and our deck and away from the house. Basically remove it anywhere it collects around your structure. Pine needles, unfortunately, are ubiquitous. They're everywhere and they're constantly falling, and you have to keep up on them. So you have to do this multiple times a year. This is one of those mitigation things that you just need to keep doing. Keep cleaning out those pine needles. Keep them away from things. And you can do a few things, like I said, to keep it, maybe make it a little easier so you don't have to be doing it quite as often. One of those is possibly you put on gutter screens or caps. Or if the gutter is in a place where you maybe don't need one, take the gutter off. Now make sure before you do that you've verified it's not going to cause problems with your foundation to have the water fall straight down. But there are some of our situations where that would be okay. And it wouldn't cause any problems, and I'm not going to walk under it because it's, in the part of my house that's not all that accessible. So why not I just take it off? As I said, box or screen in under decks. Shield corners and other accumulation points. If you have some place where you've got a corner where you can't keep the pine needles out of it, it's constantly got pine needles in it, and it's the corner of your deck or something like that, you could put metal flashing there. Copper or some other kind of metal flashing in that area. What it would do is shield that area from the heat of any embers that are burning right there. And it doesn't have to be anything particularly strong. If you think about putting foil in the bottom of your grill, the foil doesn't melt. Those embers aren't any hotter than that charcoal in your grill. So if you've got some place you just cannot seem to keep clear, you might explore options like that, like putting a decorative metal piece around that corner, that kind of thing. Again, I'm not a builder. Make sure that you're not doing something where you're going to have water collecting and create rot or something. You don't want it to fall down from rot before it burns down from a wildfire. So we're going to go back to our ember storm here. So what we have and how they built it, if it starts up, on the left-hand side of the house, on the front there, you have a vinyl gutter and you have fiber cement siding. On the right-hand side, you have a metal gutter and you have vinyl siding. And like I said, you have mulch around the base and you have mulch in the gutters. So see, our left-hand gutter is already, there it goes. So it's deformed, it's dropped all its stuff right down below, which makes it great for starting that house on fire. The siding on that side, no problem. It's fiber cement. It's not going to catch fire. You can see that there are embers starting to accumulate and burn through the screen there. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we have a lot of vinyl siding that's falling off. But the gutter is a little bit deformed, but it's still up there. That's that metal gutter. So it just gives you an idea of how the materials affect things. So you're going to work outwards from your house. These embers, these small flames, they're major culprits in the destruction of houses. During the High Park fire, the chief of Risk Canyon called those sneaker fires, because he thinks he lost more houses to sneaker fires than to flame fronts, because you'd get the embers in and it would be smoldering away someplace, and unless somebody was back through and spotted it, the next time they came back through, that house wouldn't be there, because that fire had a chance to gather. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Start by fire hardening your house and what's immediately around it before you start working outward. Prepare it to withstand that ember attack and the direct flame contact. That's your first thing to do. Think, as hard as it is to do, think of your house as if it's a campfire. Where's the kindling? Can I remove the kindling? Can I protect the areas the kindling gather? Can I shield vulnerable places? So that's the thought process you want to try to have there. Do it now. Do it at the beginning of every fire season, and do it during fire season as necessary. That sweeping part, unfortunately, getting those pine needles out, that's an ongoing process. It's always going to be with you. Do we see a problem here? What kind of problems do you think we got? Yeah. Yep. The green stuff here is not necessarily a huge problem because there's more moisture in it, because it's deciduous. But we have a lot of pine needles, and while we have what looks like the start of a fuel-free zone here, we have rocks. The problem is it hasn't been kept clean. And we can't see what exactly is under this deck here. But I'm guessing if it looks like this out here, it looks like that under there. Somebody needs to do some raking. We've got two vents here. This one looks like it's screened. I can't tell if that one is. So there's a few things that this homeowner needs to do. But it really is primarily gardening. It's doing your basic, do some raking and pull some stuff out. Maybe screen or box in that deck if you can, because that's a nice low one that is going to be difficult to get stuff out from under. The reason to do it? Because the deck is part of the house, and because what's going to burn this house down is not the flames you can see in the background. It's the fire that's burning at the bottom of those stairs right now. What else? These are the other things that are right around your house you need to think of. Store flammable items somewhere that's sheltered. If you're evacuated, if you don't live up here all the time, when you are not here, put things like patio furniture pads, brooms, doormats inside. Put them someplace they can't get embers. We don't always think of these things as flammable, but they are absolutely flammable, and they can absolutely burn your house down. If you have a propane tank attached to your grill, put it somewhere else. Inside a shed or something, that at least helps protect it a bit. If you're being evacuated or you're in pre-evacuation status, or voluntary evacuation they call it now, put it out so it's not near the house. Get it out of the way and away from the house. Preferably not in your driveway. I don't want to accidentally run into it if I'm coming in to try to do something with your house. So, but just out of the way. So that was your house. Now we're going to talk about the first 30 feet around your house. And as we said, that first 30 feet is the most important. That first 30 feet, and it's only 30 feet if we're talking ground that is 0 to 10 degree slope. Get above a 10 degree slope, and for every 10 degrees more of slope, go out 3 feet further. And you do not have to sit there and calculate this. Figure if it drops off below my house, that side I have to mitigate a lot further. Don't worry about if it goes up from your house. That's less of a problem. But the side of your house that has the slope going down from it, that's the side to mitigate further than 30 feet. So consider 30 feet where you're starting, and you go out from there. Your goal in the first 30 feet is to prevent that direct flame contact. You don't want the fire burning right up to your house. Limit your radiant heat exposure. Keep the heavy fuels and the things that are likely to burn very hot 30 feet or more out. And you want to, our goal is to starve the low intensity fire of fuel. So if the fire is coming across the ground to your house, it's a low intensity fire, or at that point. You don't want to give it an opportunity to become high intensity by climbing into a tree or by burning your house. So the whole goal with the whole mitigation area, which we're going to talk about, is to take a fire that might be coming through the treetops before it hits your property down to the ground by not giving it ways to jump from one tree to another, and then keep it down there. Because if it's on the ground, it's lower intensity, and your house is more likely to survive it. Your trees are more likely to survive it too. So the way we do this, we're going to break up fuel continuity by separating fuel canopies, tree canopies. You want to go 10 feet between individual trees, 30 feet between clusters. That's from the edge of the canopy, not from the trunk. So however wide your tree spreads out, you're going to go 10 feet between that and the next tree canopy. That keeps that fire from being able to jump from tree to tree. Obviously, we love our trees. That's why we're here. So we want to be judicious. We want to say, I want to keep this one, which means maybe this one that's not looking really great, we're going to cut that one down. And if I have a group of trees that I really love, I'm going to consider that a cluster, and I'm just going to go out further around that. Because none of us really want, individual trees. We'd like our forest. So we just have to go further from that cluster of trees. And remove your ladder fuels. Limb trees up 6 to 10 feet. Now, obviously, if the tree is 10 feet tall, don't limb it up 10 feet. It's kinder to just cut it down at that point. So, if it's a smaller tree, go up about 2/3 the height of the tree. The little itty bitty ones, treat them as if they're bushes. Just don't think of them as bushes, and I'll talk about bushes in a minute. So remove your ladder fuels. And actually, part of ladder fuels is bushes. That's if you've got bushes growing under your trees. Those are ladder fuels, and you want to remove the ones under the trees. Remove ground fuels. That was my next bit there. So think of the little bitty trees as if they're those ground fuels that you want to get out from directly under a tree. If it's a bit further away, just as long as it's doing well and it looks pretty green, treat it as it's just a bush, it's fine. If you've got bushes and trees right up close to the house, treat them as if they're part of the house, just like you do your deck. So what that means is I've got a tree right outside my deck that I like. I'm going to go 30 feet from that tree, not from my deck. I'm going to treat that as if it's part of my house. I'm going to limit up. I'm going to remove anything that is flammable underneath. And I'm just going to make sure that it's less in danger. Because if it catches fire, then my house is in danger. You should also remove any tree limbs that are touching your house or your roof. That's a combination of not allowing direct flame contact and also a little bit the other way around. If the spark arrestor on your chimney fails or your house catches fire, it'd be nice if you didn't catch the trees on fire too. Makes life a lot easier for everybody, including you. So, create a fuel-free zone that's 3 to 5 feet wide immediately around your structure. That's how you prevent your direct flame contact. And so that's your first little area there, is for 3 to 5 feet, no fuels at all, with the possible exception of I've got a tree right next to my house that I really want to keep, in which case I'm going 3 to 5 feet out from it with no fuels. This is a great fuel-free zone on a house that doesn't necessarily need it, but it's a good example. They've got a lot of rock right around there. It's a great way to make a fuel-free zone. You can also just rake away anything that's there. Make sure you've raked down to mineral soil. The first couple of layers that we have up here are duff. It's decomposed pine needles and stuff. It's still flammable. So make sure you're getting down further. For this case, if someone had come to me in advance and said, do I need to do this? I probably would have said that they would be okay without that zone. Because if you look at it, you've got very, very small grasses. There's nothing big growing up near it. And the whole bottom area there is you've got a cement foundation. So you'd have to have something, and maybe they do around the corner, a bush or something that's right up there that's taller than that foundation. Because what you have here is even if those grasses were growing right up to the edge of the house, they can't produce a flame that is big enough to touch the siding. So they aren't going to be a threat. They'll burn out very quickly, and they're not going to be able to catch that house on fire. So it's something to consider when you're looking at your house and you're thinking about your fuel-free zone. You know, oh, I've got all these little weeds or this little grass that grows up right there and it's really hard to get rid of. Well, is your foundation cement or stone? Maybe you don't have to worry about it because it's a small fuel and you don't have something flammable right next to it. Sheds and other structures. They're often within 30 feet of the house. So anything that is a heavy fuel that is burning near your house is going to create the same radiant heat exposure as burning trees. If your shed is within 30 feet of your house, if your shed's within 30 feet of your house, then your shed is a threat to your house the same way that trees within that area may be a threat to your house. So what do? You go mitigate your shed. You put in a 3 to 5 foot fuel-free zone and you limb up trees around it, and you generally make sure that the shed's less likely to catch on fire. Therefore, it's not going to be a radiant heat threat to your house. Same thing if you've got a garage that's detached, that kind of thing. Just treat it as another, oh, well, I got 2 houses here. One of them's much smaller than the other. But I need to protect the shed even if I don't care if it burns down, because if it burns down, it could threaten my house. If it's more than 30 feet away from your house, you don't have to be as strict about your mitigation. You may still really want to mitigate it because it's a source of embers and it's right there. So it's better to try to keep it from catching fire. What about your neighbor's house? Is your neighbor within 30 feet of your house? If they're not a threat to your house. Radiant heat isn't the threat at that point. It's still firebrands, as we saw here. The one house did not burn down just because its neighbor did. The reason I mention that is for a lot of people, the fact that their neighbor is not mitigating leaves them feeling like it's not worthwhile for them to be mitigating. It absolutely is. Because it does not matter what is happening on your neighbor's property if your property is well mitigated. In the sense of how much radiant heat is producing, how easy is it for that fire to hit me. It can have an effect overall with overall fire intensity, but when it comes down to it, my neighbor isn't mitigating, still mitigate your place. It is still worth it. What about a wood pile? In the summer, store your wood pile at least 30 feet from your house. During the winter, I know we want to bring that wood up. We need it for our, we don't want to go slogging through the snow to get more wood. But if it's right up against the house, you really want to move it out during the summer. Don't pile wood under your deck. Already said that. Don't pile wood against your house. Don't pile wood against your shed. If you do have to store your firewood near your house, if you've got a stack that's so huge you can't move it, or just generally speaking, you're not in a position where you can be moving it away from the house and back to the house, cover it. You can protect it from firebrands by covering it. They do make well, I don't know how non-flammable, but they do make non-flammable tarps. But even a canvas tarp would help because it's going to protect it from the firebrands showing up, falling. They're going to fall on the tarp. They are going to burn through the tarp, but maybe they won't catch that whole wood pile on fire. Because, of course, your wood pile is always surrounded by a bunch of little teeny tiny bits of kindling that fall off the wood. So there's these trade-offs. If we can't do anything about this threat, what can we do to lessen the threat? And that's where you were with wood piles. I think this person has enough firewood. I don't know how they get any of it out, but anyway. So, what about plants that are near your house? Cultivate fire-resistant plants. What are fire-resistant plants? Anything that's deciduous. Your aspen is fire-resistant. It has enough water in it that it isn't really a threat in wildfire. If you have healthy aspen near your house, don't include them in the stuff you cut down because it's good to have them there. You do still want to create a separation between plants. Don't worry about your little aspen grove, for example. But if all the plants that are within 30 feet of the house, separate them out the same way you do the trees, as much as possible. And you don't want any large tree or shrub growing directly under the eaves if you can help it at all. If that catches fire, it's a large heat source not only close to the house, but all that heat is coming up directly under your eaves and getting trapped there, which means it's much more likely for that to catch the eaves on fire. That's part of the reason also you want to box your eaves in. You're creating an area where it doesn't have this deep indentation that can collect heat. And how about a propane tank? If you can, install it more than 30 feet from the house. That really is your best bet if you can manage that. The reason I say if is that code says it only has to be 10 to 25 feet. So you may already have a propane tank that's closer in, and you may have a propane company that sees no reason to move it because it's to code. So if it's closer than 30 feet, what are we going to do? We are going to, mitigate to prevent direct flame contact. Again, you're just 3 to 5 foot fuel-free zone. No fuel under it, no fuel right around it. Don't put it under the trees or take the trees down. You don't want all that fuel right next to your propane tank. If you have smaller tanks, like for grills, move them away, as I said earlier. So that second item there, many newer tanks have a plastic line to the house. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way they're building them these days. It tends to be black or gray, and it might look like metal. It's a covering that goes over the line, but it is not metal, it is plastic. What do? Mitigate. Fuel-free zone, follow that line to your house, nothing flammable on top of it or right around it. The reason for the propane tank and for mitigating your propane tank is if you get a lot of heat impacting a propane tank, you have a serious problem. If it's a well-maintained tank, it's going to vent, which is what you want it to do, because otherwise it's going to explode. If you have a company coming up to fill your propane tank, part of their job is making sure that's a well-maintained tank and that the relief valve works and that it will vent. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. But you still don't want it venting right next to your house. That's burning propane either shooting straight up or if this line burns, shooting straight towards your house. So mitigate it so it doesn't have a lot of heat impacting it. Clean up. So in your 30 feet, you're going to cut your grasses and your weeds. Clear your clear your fuel-free zone. Make sure you don't have any flammables in it. Remove dead branches and litter that are underbrushes near the structure. Rake it out and remove your ladder fuels. And you're going to do that every year. It shouldn't be, it's unlike the bit right around the house, chances are pretty good you may only have to do this once, maybe twice a year. Twice maybe, if you've got weeds and the like that keep growing up, then you'll have to whack those back periodically. But things like your ladder fuels and your dead branches and so forth, that's all stuff that once you've done it, it should last for a couple of years probably. But check it in the beginning of fire season. Make sure you don't have anything new that's grown up that's going to be a ladder fuel or that's going to create more of a path for the fire, and get rid of it if you do. So our next step is our 30 to 100 feet out, or 30 feet to the edge of your property. Basically, the further out you go, the better. 100 feet is a good place to start with, trying to get to 100 feet out. For that 30 to 100 foot radius around your house, your goals are to keep that high intensity fire away from your house and to prevent large trees inside that radius from burning, because you don't want that extra heat because it can start other trees in the area burning and so forth. So you're trying to, again, same thing, keep the fire low intensity and on the ground. Starve the fire of fuel. If it is in the tops of the trees, when it reaches your property, bring it down. So how do we do this? Same thing we did in the 30 feet. This ought to look pretty familiar. What you're doing is the same basic things. You can be less stringent the further out you get. You can limb up less high. You can maybe leave a little bit more room between trees, that kind of thing, because what you're seeing this is a little bit, the more you can be stringent, the further out you go, the better. But if you've got that 30 feet that's really good, then your next, up to your next 100 feet, that can be a little bit less stringent. And you can, but it's still all the same basic things. That last one, the ground fuels, reminds me. I know people who try to rake up all the pine needles from under their trees. Don't bother. It's a light fuel, it burns fast, and it's not going to set your tree on fire. And you don't need huge, if you rake up all the pine needles, now you got to figure out how to get rid of all the pine needles. Either that or you're creating a big pile someplace. So don't do that. If for whatever reason you have a huge pile of pine needles or something like that under a tree, yeah, you want to get that out of there. But otherwise, do not worry about that. And don't worry about the chips from chipping things. Those also are lighter fuels. As long as they're not gathered right under your trees or right up against your house, they're not a problem. So how does this apply to things other than houses? I assume chances are pretty good everybody here actually has a house or plans on a house on their property. But there are people in Crystal who just camp, for example, or at least just camp for right now. So how does this apply to things like RVs and trailers? Well, the first thing is, unfortunately, there's not much data available. It doesn't seem like people are doing too much experimentation on what happens if there's a wildfire near my camper, because they expect people to take their campers with them. It's reasonable to assume that if vinyl melts and deforms, that your camper is going to melt and deform. And that would make it a loss, but you may have things in there you want to keep. So I would still recommend mitigating around the place that you park your camper. Create your little at least 3 to 5 foot fuel-free zone. Try to get some of the flammables out, partly so that you might have something inside the camper that's still savable if there's a fire near it, and partly because it's preferable to not have the camper itself burning. That adds to the heat impact. And usually the camper is not all that far from where you've put your house. So definitely take the propane tanks if you're leaving the camper for any length of time, especially during fire season, or if you're being evacuated. Take them, remove them from that camper and put them somewhere away from it. I only camp on my lot. I don't have anything that I don't take with me when I leave. Well, we live in a fire-adapted area. This area and these plants are not designed. They've evolved to deal with fire. The problem is they've evolved to deal with moderate intensity fire, not these massive high intensity fires. So we can still do a lot of good for ourselves and the land that we are effectively stewards for if we can keep it as a low intensity fire. It's still worth it to mitigate by doing the separating fuels and removing ladder fuels, so you won't have a high intensity fire burning over your lot. It's the difference between coming back to a moonscape and having a lot that will recover, because the trees will survive if they're not dealing with high intensity fire. So the example in the video where they were showing, all those trees around that house are dead. For some people, that means they probably are going to want to sell and move. For others, it's I'm going to stay. If we want those trees to survive, we need to mitigate so that we don't have that massive high intensity fire going through. And at that point, then you have something where it will green back up. When we had, actually I think we could probably even see it with Cameron Peak, but we did have a fire over here off Bear Trap Road a couple of years ago. And it was in the fall. In spring, the trees didn't come back because they died, but everything else greened up, and it looked good. It looked okay. So it will green back up if we don't, unfortunately, just sterilize it with a really high intensity fire. So also, when you're looking at your lot and saying, I'm going to mitigate, I've got my 30 feet, I've got my 100 feet, also go out to the edges of your lot and mitigate along the road and along the driveway. Give yourself 10 feet back from each of those locations where you've done at least some mitigation. Limb up, thin out a bit. What you're doing there is you are helping the situation for anybody who's having to pass down that road when it is on fire, which may happen. It's possible, but hopefully we will not manage this one. It's possible it could happen during an evacuation, which is something as a fire department we are determined to avoid by getting people out very early, since we only have one way out of here. But for firefighters, because what firefighters do during this kind of a wildfire is when the flame front's going to come through, we get out, and then we come back. And we come back and we try to find those little sneaker fires, and we put out anything that's currently burning, any house that's burning, etc. And the more you've got some access along roadways and driveways mitigated, the better it is for all of us. It's also, especially along your driveway, better for potentially, the safety of your house, your safety leaving, and the question of whether or not someone's going to come down your driveway to look and see whether or not they can do anything to help add to mitigation before a fire comes through, or help put stuff out after it's come through. If the driveway is completely overgrown, it's natural to assume that the house has not been mitigated and it is not going to be savable. Also, if the driveway is completely overgrown, it's not a safe place for us to be if there's a fire coming. And generally speaking, we won't stay there. So your safety, the safety of other people, may depend on making sure that things are mitigated along the edges and down your driveway. So to recap, what you're doing with your defensible space is you're going to start with your house. You're going to make sure that you've taken out all those little places the embers can gather in fuel, so remove those fuels. Create a 5-foot fuel-free zone right around the house. And then you've got your 30 feet where you're separating your fuels and you're limbing things up. And then go on out as you can. So if you do all this, is your home guaranteed to survive? No. I wish that was the case, then I wouldn't worry when I have to go do firefighting instead of evacuating stuff from my house. But no, it will make it better. Your odds are better. But we are seeing more of these wind-driven fires. And the more intense it is, the less likely this is going to work. I still think it's worth doing, because not all fires are these wind-driven fires, and anything you can do is going to be an improvement. Are you guaranteed to keep your insurance? No. The insurance companies, all their underwriters use different criteria. They may tell you you have to cut everything down in 30 feet around your house. They may tell you you have to take your aspen out. It's what their underwriters and their decision making is doing, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with this science. It depends on what exactly they're looking at. So unfortunately, all the mitigation in the world is not necessarily going to make sure that your insurance company won't decide, we're overextended in this area, we don't want to cover people here anymore. So unfortunately, where am I? Okay. Again, as I said, you are the solution. We can do this. We can mitigate and improve the safety of our community. And I know we can do this as a community because we've done something very similar to it before. If any of you have been here long enough to remember Bear Aware. Bear Aware was a program, and I've lost a page in my notes. Anyway, I'm sorry, I got to figure this out. I have information I want to share. I don't know where it went. There it is. Okay. Back in 2005, we had a bear problem. We had 122 break-ins that year. Into houses, into trailers. It was a serious problem. That year, Department of Wildlife said, okay, we want you to help us, and we're going to start a program. The program's called Bear Aware. And what we did was we taught everybody. What are bears looking for? What do we need to do to not be attractive to bears? As a result, in 2006, following year, we had 13 break-ins. 2007, we had 0. And it stayed like that. We get a handful every now and then, but we mostly don't have a lot of bear encounters. We mostly don't have a lot of break-ins. And the reason I bring this up is because I see a distinct parallel there. Fire isn't thinking. It's not a thought process like with bears, but it's a similar situation in the sense that what we did to get rid of the bears was to change our behavior. We didn't go out there and teach the bears to do something different. You can't do that directly. We changed our behavior, and as a result, we changed what was happening. We made little changes, but they had a big difference. Just like taking out pine needles out of your gutter. That makes a big difference. Individual efforts were worthwhile. I didn't hear anybody saying, well, my neighbor's not protecting against the bears, so why should I? Well, because you're going to protect your own house this way. And the end result was together we changed the path that natural threat took. We became a place that wasn't attractive to bears. We can be a place that's not as attractive to wildfire. And all of this has a cumulative effect. As I said, it does not matter if your neighbor is mitigating. It's still better for you to be mitigating than not. Them not doing it doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile for you to do it. But the more people that have mitigated, the more mitigation we have going on, the fewer homes are likely to burn. The fewer homes are burning, the lower the fire intensity. And the lower the fire intensity, the fewer homes are likely to burn. Which is encouragement for you to tell all your friends and neighbors. We've got a bunch of information on our website. We've got more of these classes. Come and learn. This stuff is helpful. It can make a difference. You guys can fight wildfire. All of us can, not just the firefighters. We can be the difference between whether our property is this one or that one. And the thing is, Crystal Lakes Fire Department cannot help you do the mitigation work. Unfortunately, that's all on you. We can help. We want to help. We provide mitigation assessments to property owners in Crystal Lakes. We'd like you to do the self-assessment checklist first. That's the one I'm handing out here, and it's also on our website, to see what you need to do based on what you understand of this, and do some mitigation work, and then have us come and help you with what else can I do. We will, however, come out right off. If you look at everything and go, I still don't know what to do, sign up on our website. We will have somebody come out and they will walk you through what they see and what they think that you can do to help mitigate your property. And anybody have any questions? All right, thank you very, very much for listening to me.